You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And joining me now is David Ray, representative from the R-Maumelle, Republican. Good to see you, sir.
Hey, good morning, Roby.
Thank you for being here.
Glad to be back with you.
You're about to be in the limelight all this next week with the special session. You're going to be active on tax cuts and this Freedom of Information Act bill. That'll be the biggest focus, I think, of the special session. Let's begin with tax cuts.
Sure.
What's being proposed? How difficult is it going to be to get it through?
Well, these are income tax cuts. For folks who follow the legislature, it's not a surprise. For the last 8 or 9 years, we've been steadily reducing our personal and corporate income tax rates to become more competitive with surrounding states, to grow our economy, to reward work and labor and productivity, all those good things. We started with a top rate of 7% about 8 or 9 years ago. We've steadily chipped away at that. Today, our top rate is 4.7%. There's about 1.1 million Arkansans that pay that rate. It applies to everybody that makes $25,000 or more, so it's very broad-based.
It's not just a tax cut for the rich, which is one of the arguments that we hear a lot.
That's right. It's very broad-based. 1.1 million Arkansans pay the top rate. Today, it's 4.7. What's being proposed is to drop that rate to 4.4%. I think that's a very reasonable step to continue this reduction. You know, the state has run 3 consecutive years now of surpluses that are at or exceeding $1 billion. And that's just a sign that the state's taxing our citizens too much.
There's a corporate tax cut in this as well, right, to bring it down another 0.3%?
Yes, and the 0.3% reduction on the corporate side will mirror the individual rate.
All right, let's talk about what will be much more controversial, I predict, and that is the Freedom of Information Act bill. A draft has been floated out there. You're the lead sponsor on that in the House. What is the emergency that exists that needs to be addressed by this Freedom of Information Act bill?
Sure. So what led to this FOIA issue making its way onto the special session call is we discovered that there's a glaring hole in our FOIA. There's no exemption for the governor's executive protection and security. Now, this has come to light because there's a left-wing blogger who has FOIA'd all of the
Matt
governors.
Campbell with a Blue Hog
The
report.
Blue Hog, yeah, who has FOIA'd all of the records related to the governor's security, not just expenditure data, but all records on security for her and her family. Now, the reason someone has executive protection, like the governor, is because their job places them at an elevated risk of personal security. Personal danger because of their job, right?
So your bill wants to restrict the disclosure of those security plans that the state police, the protocol, the procedures for how they handle that, correct?
That's right, and that's extremely important. So last month in Oklahoma, a deranged man was arrested and pled guilty to threatening to kill Governor Sanders and her family. Last year,
and some other Republican officials.
Yes, as well as Ron DeSantis and Ted Cruz. Last year in Russellville, a man was arrested for threatening to shoot Governor Sanders. If you'll remember, when she worked in the White House under President Trump, she was the only press secretary in the history of the nation to require Secret Service protection. That's usually only reserved for presidents and vice presidents, and it would never get extended to someone that didn't have credible threats against their life.
I don't think anybody argues with the need to protect the security protocol for the governor, et cetera. I don't see any problem with that. I've worked in the governor's office before. I actually used to field the calls and the correspondence that would come in that had threats in them and deliver those to the state police detail. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that at all. But when it comes to protecting the expenses that are out there that are tied to some of this security detail, why is that necessary to protect from the public? It seems like that should be information that is publicly available that does not disclose any security protocol other than just to say what's been expended and who was on an airplane with her, for instance, traveling.
Well, financial information, how taxpayers' money is spent, as a general rule, should be provided, right? With security-related expenditures, you know, there may be select things that might need to be redacted about a certain expenditure because it may give away some of the methods and procedures of how the state police protect the governor, their movements, their tactics, those sorts of things. But as a general rule, yeah, that should be provided, and I think it will continue to be.
But under your bill, it would not be disclosed. That information would not be provided.
Well, look, any determination on what's provided is going to be made by the frontline records custodian. In that case, this would be state police, right? But I fully intend that information related to financial transactions is going to be publicly available. Now, like I said, some of it may need to be aggregated for security reasons.
Right.
Some of it may need to be portions of it redacted. Those are all things that might need to happen.
So if you wanted to know if the governor was using the state airplane that is assigned to her for personal or political use, do you think that your bill will allow that information to be made publicly available?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. There's a lot of other things in the FOI bill that don't relate to this security issue. Why are we adding that to this special session call? What's the emergency for restricting attorneys' fees and for this deliberative process that is part of this bill as well?
Sure. So there's three other portions of the bill. There's the attorney's fees portion, deliberative process, and attorney-client privilege. Look, the reason is because generally all of these things deal with the same topic area. The governor is placing these issues on the call. That's her responsibility as the governor. It's our responsibility as the legislature to consider those proposals, to debate them, and to vote on them. So all of these things we have worked on in consultation with the governor, with her office, and everything that's included.
But not in public on the Freedom of Information
Well,
Act.
the bill is filed, and so the bill is public.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's been deliberated and debated before there was ever any public hearings about this, before there's been any conversation or opportunity for the public to have any
Well,
input.
but that's the way every bill is. When a bill is filed, it becomes public, and then it goes through the normal process. You know, it's going to be debated in a committee. It's going to be debated on the floor.
Well, in a special
there's
session,
opportunity for public input.
I'm interrupting you here, but in a special session, I've seen how the regular session has worked. The bill is already put out there in a special session. Votes are typically already, wrangled and decided, because the governor ain't going to call a special session until they know how the outcome of the bills are going to be. So the public's going to go give 2 minutes apiece for an afternoon, and then the bill's going to pass through committee because it's already been pre-decided on that. Are you willing to take public input and make changes?
Well,
to your bill?
that's the case with any bill, whether it's in a special session or a general session. I don't think there's a huge distinction.
Are you willing to change it,
between
though? I guess that's what I'm saying. If you get public input that raises questions about the need for some of these changes.
Well, we've made a lot of changes to the bill, and a lot of the changes that we've made were based on public input from the last general session when I proposed different changes to the FOI. Like, for example, the response time is staying at 3 days. That's the shortest response time in the nation. It was clear to me that that's important to a lot of folks, so I removed that from the bill. Same with uncompensated FOIA charges and things like that. So there's a lot of public input that has gone into how we arrived at what's in the bill and what's not.
This deliberative process, though, I think this is one area where I have a lot of hang up on this. It basically is going to allow elected officials in the executive branch to conduct business, which to me is probably already covered by working papers if it's the governor's office and anything going through the executive branch. But you're talking about agencies being able to have conversations now about potential policy without the public being able to request those records from through the Freedom of Information Act. How is that providing more sunshine and more light into what's going on in state government?
So deliberative process is something that exists throughout many FOIA laws across the country. The language in our bill is modeled on the Federal Freedom of Information Act and its deliberative process exemption. It exists so that agencies can better develop policy in a way that is not under constant scrutiny at the pre-decisional part of the process. It has to be, there's a lot of case law on what goes into deliberative process and what's not deliberative process. And it obviously has to be deliberative in nature, it has to be pre-decisional in nature. All of these things improve the outcomes, the policy outcomes for the public, and it leads to better policy because people are able to deliberate with candor, with honesty. There's more free-flowing discussion. There's not a chilling effect.
Not from the general public, though. I mean, they're not going to have any idea that any of this stuff's being debated until it is decided and comes out.
Well, any actions that government takes are absolutely 100% public. If an agency issues a rule, for example, then there's notice and comment period on all of those. That is absolutely the public's right and responsibility to participate in that.
We're going to have to agree to disagree on just what the potential ramifications of this are. There'll be
Sure.
more debate on this. Last question for you, and I got to wrap it up here. Are you guys going to vote on this bill? It's got an emergency clause. Are you going to vote for the bill and the emergency clause, or are you going to have two different votes?
Look, I'm not the parliamentarian, so I'll defer that question to the parliamentarian.
All right. Well, we'll see how it goes. Representative David Ray, thank you for
Robbie.
being here. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week at the Capitol.